r/Askreddit by Robotainment. Children, if I want to talk to your manager parents, what has been your most embarrassing experience? We traveled a lot when we were younger and would skip lines at the airport since we were kids, but now we were all in our early teens and my mom faked having a heart condition to skip the long line to get on the airplane. Flight attendant would have none of it and told us to go back to the end of the line. I still remember the smiles and looks of everyone there. I never understood this strange addiction to getting on the plane first. I like to spend as little time as possible in a cramped aluminum tube surrounded by loud strangers bumping into you trying to put their luggage in overhead bins. I wait at the fucking gate until the end. It's not like you're going to get a better seat and then the same people are the ones rushing to get off first. I don't get it. And you see everyone again for the rest of the flight. My mom has been this person regularly throughout my life, but I do have one positive story with it. She and I went to eat at Portillo's when I was a teenager and we sat in the back of the restaurant where it was more private so we can eat in peace. About 10 minutes into our meal, two people come into the empty area and sit down to tables away from us. Turns out it was a manager and an employee that was getting written up. The manager was being a complete shit towards the employee, criticizing and belittling them. My mom put down her food and walked over and started yelling at the manager for being such an asshole. She went on a rant about how rude and wrong it was of him to do this in front of the public 2 tables away from customers and really let him have it. She demanded the phone number of the manager above him and we left after she received it. I was pretty embarrassed at the time, but as I got older I realized that she was standing up for that employee and how wrong that manager really was. I'm not 100% sure what she did with that phone number because I lived with my dad and I had to go home after that meal. Props to her. Also yum. Portillo's. Edit. My first gold. Thank you Redditor. I might be late, but my dad once asked the guy at the Verizon wireless store to give him his own social security number because he asked for my dad's. My dad walked out afterwards with some stranger's SS number on a post-it. I was a silent bystander because I really wanted my first phone. I hope the guy didn't actually give your dad his SSN lol. My mother did this in restaurants non-stop growing up. She would demand to see the manager because my burger, which I asked for medium, had some pink in it. At a family friend's cookout, not a restaurant, I bit into a burger that had ice in it. I was about 12. I showed my dad and he silently threw it in the trash. He told me to eat some chips and coleslaw instead, but don't make a big deal out of it. As an adult I enjoy rare steaks, but I can't bring myself to order a burger rare. Guess I made a big deal out of it anyway. Edit. It was not an ice cube. More like flakes of ice from the patty being frozen. My dad really doesn't like confrontation. I don't like confrontation either, but as an adult I'm assertive enough to tell a friend if they undercooked something. I was with my parents on vacation and the hotel put charges on the bill by accident. My mom marched to the front desk and demanded to see the manager. There was a long line, but she cut right in front of it. The manager wasn't very helpful, probably because she was rude, so my mom went to all the other customers in line and told them that the hotel was a scam and they were ripping us off with fake charges. She made a scene. The hotel called the police and we were escorted off the premises by actual cops. I died inside. That's the kind of thing that makes you never want to be seen with your parents ever again. And they did it while you were on vacation, no less. Great way to spoil your memories. About once a month my dad gets drunk and calls various customer service centers demanding stuff. Once he finally gets off the phone, frequently 45+ minutes later, he spends the next few days telling us all about how he slew the customer service dragon and boy, people sure don't appreciate their customers nowadays, blah blah blah. No doubt that you're being an asshole. No one appreciates that. If you've worked for DirecTV customer service anytime since 1996, I apologize on behalf of my dad. Edit. Another story for y'all. I also remembered one time McD's was having some kind of 2-for-1 breakfast sandwich deal going on where the total was about $3. He gets his breakfast, drives 25 minutes to work, realizes he's missing one of the sandwiches, and proceeds to call McD's customer support every evening after work for a week to complain about his wasted $1.50. They gave him apologies. They gave him coupons. but he just wanted to yell. Does he call himself a dragon slayer? My father consistently returns food to grocery stores when he is unsatisfied with the quality. The worst is when he returns the 2-pound bricks of cheddar cheese because they went moldy before they should have. I left this in my trunk since June and it hasn't even cracked 30 Celsius outside yet. Before Value Village Savers in the States I think changed policies, she would cut tags to get discounts, since the cashiers would basically make up whatever price they thought it would be on the spot. If they highballed it, she would get a manager involved, and I hated that. Lots of second-hand/thrift shops now have a rule that items without tags will not be sold, likely for the above scenario. When I was a young child on a long-distance flight, my mother let me and my brother sleep on the floor. For safety reasons, the flight attendants told my mother that we were not allowed to sleep on the floor. She started to argue with the flight attendants, who then turned to the pilots. The pilots threatened to turn the plane around unless we get up from the floor, but she continued to argue. The pilots announced they were about to turn around because of my mother, so all the passengers got pissed. Eventually she caved in when she had all passengers and flight crew on a Boeing 747 against her. Not the child, but I think this fits. I had this awful annoying terrible neighbor who, because I'm a giant sucker, I was kind to her. She asked me to come with her to dinner because it was her birthday and I knew I was the only person on the planet who would go with her, and gosh darn it, it's her birthday, how could I say no? So she and I went, and we brought our kids, all girls, one mine, two hers. She makes her oldest do her math homework right there at the table. When the child asks her for help, mind you this is like 3rd grade math, the mom says it's too hard. I end up helping. The waiter is just fine. He comes by and takes our orders. She is already acting weird, but she always acted weird, so I didn't think much of it. Waiter comes by again and asks if we need anything. She dismisses him and waves him off and tells him no. Then like 30 seconds later turns to me and is like, "Can you believe how awful the waiter is? He won't even refill my drink," and just goes on about all these issues that literally don't exist. I'm like, he just asked if you needed anything. She cuts me off. I'm going to talk to the manager. Oh god. She talks to the manager like this is the worst experience she's ever had in the history of her miserable existence. I'm in shock. Her kids have their heads down. Mine is oblivious. Lol. The manager gives her like half off the meal. Oh, and the cooker? That's my half. So you only need to pay the rest. Oh gee, thanks. I left a big tip and a note on my receipt telling them the waiter was great and apologizing for the complaints that were totally not warranted. It was the second most embarrassing restaurant experience of my life. My dad just loved to argue, and he loved a deal. We were shopping in a department store and I found a pair of pants I was mildly interested in. The pants were tagged at let's say $40 and the sign on the rack was all pants $25. I was mildly interested. I asked the sales clerk if they had them in my size. The clerk said those aren't supposed to be on that rack. My dad lost his shit and insisted on getting the pants for $25 and started asking for a courtesy discount on top of that. Escalated to the floor manager and the store manager. Meanwhile, I didn't want the pants. They were okay pants, I guess. Nothing awesome. I just didn't care very much about them. I was more than happy to move on. I told my dad I didn't want the pants. By then he didn't care about what I wanted. He wanted the pants at the better price. Eventually, after like an hour of arguing, the store manager said, "We are not giving you the pants at that price. Take them or leave them at $40. So we left them, which suited me just fine because I didn't want the pants. And #X200B and #X200B and #X200B and #X200B. Retail workers have zero control over customers putting things in the wrong places. Your dad is a retail nightmare. I don't like going to restaurants with her. She thinks that because she worked as a waitress for a year 35 years ago, it gives her the right to act like a complete asshole to them. She also thinks not tipping them will encourage them to get their act together. Joke's on you, mom. I always find our server after seated, give them a $20, and apologize in advance for your poor behavior. Edit. Yes, she knows what I think of it. She doesn't care. She believes she's sticking to her principles, and that tipping poor service read, never had good service, something will always be wrong, will encourage our laziness. It's not going to stop. If you wait on her, I'm very sorry. Edit 2. She waited tables at a Pizza Hut when she was 20. She looks back at her time through rose-colored glasses. I worked hard, went above and beyond to get my tips, then she yells at the waitress for trying to refill her drinks. Excuse me, did I ask for a refill? Obviously logic and empathy are not her strong points. My stepfather who raised me and I have very different opinions on tipping. He starts at 15%, knocks it down a percent every time he feels like he waited too long for something. So it typically ends up at 12, 13%. I start at 20% and bump it up a percent. If I'm being particularly demanding, I drink a lot of water every time we go out to dinner together and he pays. I surreptitiously watch the amount he tips and cover the difference to what I would have tipped. It is literally the only reason and only time I ever carry cash. She thinks that because she worked as a waitress for a year 20 years ago, it gives her the right to act like a complete asshole to them. She also thinks not tipping them will encourage them to get their act together. Anyone who has worked retail or food service, yet still treats retail and food service workers poorly, is a blue ribbon asshole. My grandmother wasn't only a let me talk to your manager type, she was a racist, and advancing dementia completely turned off her filter for that. I've blocked out all the context behind it other than I took her to buy yarn and something went wrong. I think maybe they shorted her a couple bucks, or wouldn't honor a coupon or something. Whatever it was ended in a let me talk to your manager followed by a tirade to the manager about how they shouldn't be hiring Mexicans. I just remember having to talk over her and say, oh my god, you can't talk to her like that. Nothing you just said is okay, followed by me trying to push her wheelchair out of the store as fast as possible with her digging her feet into the ground trying to get me to stop so she could go back to trying to ruin someone's day, and me wondering if I'd go to jail for elder abuse if her ankle snapped in the process, because nothing was going to stop me getting her out of that store. I got her into the car and then went back in and apologized till I was blue in the face. I wish I could say it was an isolated incident, but it definitely wasn't. If by any cosmic chance any sales clerks or phone reps that had to deal with my grandmother read this thread, I'm so incredibly sorry. I apologize on behalf of my whole family and I'd give you a hug if I could. As an interesting side effect of caring for her, I have a tendency to wander off and pretend to look at things when we get to the register if I'm with someone and I'm not the one paying. I think she gave me an honest to God phobia. Edit. Thanks for the helpful suggestions about pulling the wheelchair backward next time. She passed away 2 years ago, so it's thankfully something I won't have to deal with for a while. I'd never experienced someone digging their heels in before, and I was sorta panicking trying to get her out of the store before she tried anything else. I think under any kind of better circumstances I would have worked it out. Edit 2 bonus story edition. This one thankfully happened at home, but is nevertheless I guess equal parts amusing and equally awful as the other story in hindsight. It was some kind of special occasion, probably one of our birthdays, because we were all sitting at the kitchen table eating cake. The nightly routine was we all sit down to eat dinner, and she'd put the TV on the evening news which we'd halfway listen to. They were talking about something political, and said blah blah blah, and the House Judicial Committee approved this. My grandmother caught that one line and said, "The Judicial Committee? Those damn Jews. What are they doing with all these committees?" I got caught somewhere between wanting to laugh at her misunderstanding and wanting to make some kind of noise of horror, and instead I just inhaled sharply and aspirated a gigantic mouthful of chocolate cake and coughed so hard and so long that my mom wound up having to take me to urgent care because it set off my asthma. Good times y'all, good times. I feel you, friend. My grandma is losing her shit, and it's getting very hard to take her out in public. At my sister's wedding, she was loudly talking shit about all the guests during the ceremony, mostly about how revealing and inappropriate their clothes were. Of course, I was thinking, doesn't she realize how much more objectionable it is to talk shit during a ceremony? But, guess not. She's always been opinionated and outspoken. But the filter is fucking gone now, and it's a sight to behold. Stay strong and good luck. I worked at Best Buy. I stopped in with my mom one day because she wanted to buy me the Star Wars DVD box set for my birthday. I had a huge crush on the girl that was working the customer service counter. Well, the DVD set rang up $10 more than it was priced, and my mom deliberately didn't say anything until after the transaction, so she could claim the effing $5 Michigan scan law bounty. My crush didn't know how to process it, and the manager was busy, so my mom tore into her about how it was her job and how she should understand how to do things at my job to a girl I liked. My life was misery for a while afterward. Edit. RIP my inbox. No, I never got the courage up to ask her out, and she left the store afterwards. Michigan scanner law. Price must be clearly displayed where the item is located on the shelf, or on the item itself. If the item is rung up, and the machine prices it at higher than the signage and the customer has 1 paid that price and 2 has a receipt, then within 30 days they may contact the seller. The seller is required to pay back the difference as well as a bonus which is 10 times the amount of the price difference, minimum $1 and maximum $5. If the seller refuses to pay the customer may take them to court and recover damages, or $250, whichever is greater, as well as reasonable attorney fees of up to $300. Holy hell. The only thing I really see necessary here is that the price is clearly conveyed, and the difference is refunded. That shit is overkill. Also, I hate that gas stations don't clearly display their prices. Is this bag of candy $1? Is it $3.50? Who fucking knows? Scene. Any fast food drive-thru. Worker. Ma'am, can you please drive forward a little bit while your food finishes up? Mom. No folds arms. My mom needed to return some shirts at the mall because they didn't fit right. It was past the allotted time that she had to return them, so the employee said that there wasn't anything she could do. My mom started screaming at this girl who was probably about 16 or 17, calling her names and demanding to speak to the manager. When the manager told my mom that they couldn't do anything and that the return policy was on the receipt, my mom threw a fit and knocked over a display that was next to the register and stormed out of the store. I was probably 6 or 7 at the time, and I was mortified. I apologized for her behavior and picked up what I could before she started calling for me to follow her. The manager was super sweet to me though, and told me that I was a good kid and to stick up to my mom when I could get away with it. Gotta love that manager who can put up with some own shit and be nice to the kids. Not my parent but grandparent. When I was around 10 years old, my grandmother went out and got us, my brother, and me McDonald's. We got home and we didn't have napkins in the bags. No big deal, right? We have paper towels and napkins in the house. Also, me and my brother are pretty good with not making any messes while we eat. Nope. Grandmother got us in the car, drove back to McDonald's, demanded a manager, and screeched about how upset she was that we didn't get any napkins. I wanted to just melt into the floor and disappear. It's just napkins, nanny. Edit. Changed wording a little bit. She drove all the way back over napkins. I don't even consider driving back if I get someone else's order entirely. I'd rather just be done with going out and eat. I do not understand the amount of energy she is willing to dedicate to such pettiness. Grocery store had this sign up that said, if an item rang up higher than an advertised price it was free. It was the 80s and stores did stupid shit like this that I never see in stores today. Mom was buying a box of Little Debbie cakes and they rang up for $2.85 instead of the advertised $2.50. So now mom wants her free cakes. Cashier doesn't know what to do, summons a manager. Manager tells her to ring up the sale otherwise, and he'll be right back. Comes back and hands my mother 35 cents cheerfully and says, there you go. My mother points out the sign behind him and he says, oh, the last manager put that up. It doesn't make any sense. I'm the new manager and I just haven't had the sign removed. Yet it was a printed plastic sign that was screwed into the wall. Mom insists they honor their sign. He says now, up to this point, as an adult looking back, I'm totally on board with mom's actions. Mom gathers her things, decides against taking the Little Debbies on principle, and we get in the car. Mom wordlessly drives downtown to the main store of this 3 to 5 store chain, knowing the office is next door. We walk into this perfectly 80s wood paneled office, where my mother asks the secretary to speak to the owner of the store, and is permitted to do so, since this is a family owned business and their corporate office is smaller than the row of cubicles my staff occupy at work. Here my mother unleashes a tirade about how she has lost faith in his brand, and how his word is meaningless, since they will not honor the sign, etc. This guy stands up, profusely apologizes, validates her anger, and then pulls out his wallet and hands her a $5 bill along with a promise that he will speak to the manager and the sign will either be honored or removed. We get home and find that the ice cream we bought melted in the trunk because summer and ruined the cereal and the bread. Let's put this story in the dictionary next to the word pick. My dad would sometimes do this at restaurants if the server was too slow or the food was wrong, especially multiple times in the same meal. He was totally right in being frustrated because sometimes this was extreme, but we all hated it. The worst time was when we were in our favorite restaurant. My mom literally said, "I'm not doing this," and gathered up us 3 kids and we went to the car. Edit, you guys seem to have gotten the wrong impression. My dad was not a dick to anyone, and he did this a few times a year at worst. The incidents I remember warranted him speaking with the manager, and he was never rude or insulting. The rest of us just didn't care enough about bad service to say anything to anyone. I can't help but feel like I prompted you to ask this question. I'm sorry for embarrassing you. Not me, but my sister-in-law. Her stepdad and mom took the family out to eat at a Red Lobster. They get there, and it is super busy. So the stepdad walks up to the host and says, "Yes, we have a reservation. The problem is, Red Lobster, or at least, that one doesn't take reservations." The host explains this and says it is going to be 20 minutes wait for seating. Her stepdad flipped out and started screaming that he had called 3 hours beforehand and made a reservation. The host politely told him this was not possible as they do not take reservations again. He continues to scream at the guy and says he wants to talk to a manager. So the manager comes out and she tells him the same thing. They don't take reservations, so it's not possible that he had made one. He continues to cause a scene and people started leaving just to get away from this toxic guy. Finally, the manager says, "Fine, we will put you ahead of everyone else that has been patiently waiting their turn." He says thank you. They get seated. Once they get to the table and the waitress walks away, he slyly winks and says to my brother and the rest of the family, "That is how you get things done." I wasn't going to wait 20 minutes. My brother refused to eat or order for fear of getting food that had been spit on. Edit word sister-in-law replaced my brother's wife and general cleanup. One time my granddad got a sausage roll at a football match during halftime. When he got back to his seat he found it was overdone. The pastry was quite burned. The man was irate. He didn't take it back straight away as the second half was about to start, but he spent much of the second half angrily lamenting his savory snack letdown. So he takes it home, calls the customer service number on the back. I assume he had a few choice words for the poor soul on the other end. But I wasn't present for this, and keeps the remainder of the sausage roll in the freezer for the next couple of weeks. Skip ahead to the next match day. My granddad tells me we are heading out early, so he can have his sausage roll replaced. The customer service line told him to go to kiosk 3 at the front of the ground next to the ticket office. When we arrive, however, the shutters are down at the food place. The old man looks around growling and turning red in the face, stamps right over to window number 3 of the ticket office and slams his frozen burned sausage roll down like a fucking flaky gauntlet. At this point I'm trying to convince him the ticket office was a completely different department to the catering concession, but my granddad was having none of it. The lady working the ticket window continually attempted in vain to convince him the same. They sell match tickets, not hot snacks, but this just got him angrier and angrier. Across comes a colleague behind the glass. Now there's just 2 people to rage at. Then a head steward comes to attempt to defuse the situation and my granddad begins to wave the burnt sausage roll in this man's face. I was actually surprised he didn't whack him with it. At this point I'm mortified by the whole affair, wishing I'd have stayed back at the house until nearer kickoff. Eventually, after an hour or so, the shutters come up on the food concession. Fella at the counter goes, "You must be Mr. Alaginge," and calmly resolves the situation, dispatching a freshly baked sausage roll with the steady hands of a surgeon. My granddad is completely satisfied with the result of his hour of insolent rage. As we are walking away, he turns to me and says, "That's how you get these things sorted." Not exactly the question, but my dad was great with those customers. We had a small family business selling and installing fireplaces. For context, on more than one occasion, when getting the customer call or come in after the installers had finished up and left the job site to bitch about one of the men being rude or something, he could get this look of grave concern on his face. He would then go into a backstory, saying things like, "Oh no, not again," or do the open mouth, closed teeth inhale thing and just tsk, and then start on with some nonsense about having told the guy before that it was his last warning, and go on about how he was going to have to let them go. The blood draining from people's faces or the dead silence on the other end of the phone line was magical, followed by the customer frantically explaining that maybe it wasn't that bad or blaming themselves. He was never going to fire anyone, but he'd find out real quick who was just complaining for fun. Many of those customers have no qualms about getting the employee in trouble, but in general folks don't want to jeopardize people's livelihoods. I was out to breakfast with my mom, and our waitress straight up disappeared. We sat for a good 30 minutes after having ordered nothing but eggs. It was an off time, so the diner was pretty quiet. It was as if our waitress had just evaporated. Naturally, my mom asked someone if we could speak with the manager. She stops by, my mom lets her know what's happened, and asks if she can check on our waitress, our food, etc. 10 minutes later the manager shows up with our food, and the waitress in tow. She put our food down, then proceeded to rip into the waitress. This poor woman broke down in tears, apologizing profusely. We felt awful, didn't even bother finishing our food. Once the manager was out of sight, my mom found the waitress, gave her a hug, and a larger tip than usual. It was rough, leaving us both sufficiently embarrassed. Okay, so we were going to a theme park in the capital of the country. I must have been around 19, which makes my one sister 16, and the youngest around 9. My dad had been planning this for a year, and we were psyched to go. After you go into this place, you see a huge lake, and on each side there are several shops. A restaurant there, a souvenir shop there, and also, there is a Build-A-Bear shop. This shop is not a part of the park itself, but it does have an entrance from the park. Anyway, my dad didn't have custody of my sister at the time, and only saw her very sporadically. This was by his own choice, since his anxiety meant he couldn't care for her properly. She lived with a foster family. This was one of maybe 3 times a year he got to actually take her somewhere, so this trip was a big deal. He told her she could have one thing from the park, whatever she wanted he would pay for it. And, being a 9-year-old girl, she said she wanted a Build-A-Bear. My dad was unfamiliar with the concept of Build-A-Bear, so he didn't know that the price of the bear isn't the total price. On top of it comes the clothes, the shoes, etc. So the shop person takes my sister through the whole thing. You know, stuffing, putting the heart in etc. and rings up the total. My dad totally lost it. Like, red in the head, screaming at this poor girl in the shop lost it. And I felt so embarrassed. Firstly, this girl didn't make the prices. Secondly, this was the trip of the year. It was all 4 of us for the first time in forever. And thirdly, you don't yell at people like that. I get that he was angry, since he didn't know the process, and felt cheated. And also, he felt backed into a corner, since he had promised my sister that she could have anything. But you don't do that. Ever. Luckily, the rest of the trip went by without a hitch, and my youngest sister doesn't remember this happening. She has 2 Build-A-Bears now, and she named each of them after one of her sisters. My parents are terrible tippers. They genuinely believe that excellent service equals 10% tip. I have explained to them numerous times how servers tip out, etc., and they still think anything over 10% is generous. OHH lordy, my mom is one of those, but she's not the type to push her way through lines, and would only talk to a manager if really need be, but due to her stern and scary personality she can really draw attention to herself. One incident when I was around 8 or 9 was when we had to pay our immigration fees. This wasn't in the US by the way, but in the Philippines. We aren't Filipino citizens, So we need to go both to the US Embassy then the local immigration offices to pay our yearly dues while living there. The immigration processing line was long, like DMV long and slow. Not to mention the office was infamous for having really lazy workers who only speed up the paperwork when there's a bribe. My mom, after 2 hours of waiting, had enough. She actually knew the vice chief at that time, went to school with him. And this is how the conversation goes. Mom, I want to speak to the chief. Wiggum Simpson name here. Officer, scoffed at mom. Sorry, but you can't just meet. Mom, cuts her off, and leans in, and in a low drawl tell Chief Wiggum, Marge is here. He know who I am. Looks at me, then the officer. He knows who we are. Officer had a look of panic, asks a co-worker to watch his booth, and leaves. About 10 minutes later, this jolly fellow, bit of sweat on his brow, comes by, hugs my mom, and gave his officers a look. Mom took me by the hand and we were ushered to his office. In the 15 minutes we were there, our papers were personally processed by him. In the next few years we would just walk into his office to get this done, and had this perk till he passed away. Learned later that day of my memory, Chief Wiggum was in a board meeting when he got called and abruptly left. Due to my mom's actions, it was assumed she was his mistress and me the love child. He got quite the teasing of a lifetime back of that. As a note, my mom was the alumni secretary of her school, is also one of the most beautiful in her class, and is a badass. I never knew Chief Wiggum has been to our house many times during reunions. Many of my mom's classmates moved to being big bosses in govt offices, and she pulled this prank a few times, much to the amusement of her friends. They love her to bits. Not me, but one that I witnessed. I was at a cell phone store a few years ago. This was when phones first started to become water resistant. A kid had apparently gone swimming with his phone all day, and the phone had some discoloration to the screen and the touch screen wasn't working correctly. The kid obviously knew he screwed up, and he kept asking the mom if they could just leave, that the phone still worked, and he would survive. And #X200B, the mom didn't even try to be civil. She came in, and immediately started to be an abusive customer. I remember she laughed as she said, "Oh, you're gonna hate me, you should just get your manager now." I remember she laughed as she said, "Oh, you're gonna hate me, you should just get your manager now." I'd do that, and have 911 already dialed. I was young and my mom and stepdad took us to McDonald's. Somehow an ale or something got stuck in the tire which caused a flat. I'm not sure if it happened in the lot or not, but they were convinced it was. They went to talk to the manager. I don't remember exactly what their demands were, but they didn't get them. They literally went into the street waving people away, saying that they were closed because they were mad. It just seemed like a ridiculously excessive thing to do. It was at a TGI Fridays in Katy, Texas. This waiter was amazing. He was working 8 tables that I could count and was managing all of them flawlessly. Drinks never got below 1/3 full at any table. He was always attentive and prompt, friendly, just a textbook example of the perfect waiter. He impressed my dad so much that my dad asked if he could speak to a manager. Of course, the waiter immediately asks if anything is wrong, since that's the only time someone asks. My dad tells him no, it's to make sure that management knows what excellent service he's providing. The waiter thanks us and says he'll get a manager over as quickly as he can. We wait for about 10 minutes before this middle-aged greaseball of manager saunters over and starts asking my dad how the waiter screwed up. My dad is not the most patient of people, and we were kinda in a hurry to get home, so the 10-minute wait was rubbing him wrong. But when the manager immediately acted like the guy was a screw up, my dad lost it. He told the manager that the waiter had done everything perfectly, and that's why he tipped the guy $15 on a $35 ticket. He also went on to say that the manager needed to be more respectful of his staff, and gave the guy an ass chewing for presuming that the employee had screwed up. Before that moment, I thought that my sister and I were the only ones he would scream at when he was upset. It was somewhat embarrassing to see my dad yell at this guy, but he did it for a good reason. My mom came to my school because she thought I was lying about what I got on my SATs. She didn't think I was that smart. No one in my school would give her that information because they didn't have to. She got to my principal and said, "I want to speak to your manager in front of me." He refused and they argued for a while. The principal knew I was an okay guy and the score I told my mother was legit. It was really embarrassing though. About the only thing my dad and I have in common is we like to go thrifting. Garage sales, estate sales, antique stores, and charity thrift shops. Thing is, we do it for different reasons. I do it for the fun of finding something unusual and offbeat. Dad does it because he likes to find bargains, to be one up on the suckers who didn't know what they had. So I was mortified when Dad went to the charity shop checkout and bitched for 10 minutes about being overcharged 50 cents. Left him in the store alone. When he finally came out, I went in and dropped $5 in the donation jar and apologized for my asshole father. My father-in-law and stepmother-in-law are the culprits in my case. They are absolute monsters at restaurants towards the wait staff. They seem to enjoy the game of how many annoying little hoops they can make servers jump through. It's too cold in here. It's too hot in here. The music is too loud. The salsa is too hot. They've made them do 3 or 4 things by the time we even order our food. Then my mother-in-law loves to order something spicy off the menu, but then tell them to make it not spicy. And these are not 4-star restaurants, just simple diners and so forth. One time my father-in-law was particularly rude over a Coke machine being out of order. He complained to the manager and stiffed the waitress. When I realized that he didn't tip, I called back to the restaurant, let them know some of us at the table were happy with the service, and asked them to run my credit card for her tip. And that was the last time I'll let him pay for our meal. Edited for spelling. I think every memory I have of my mom is her yelling at a customer service employee either on the phone or in their face. I always felt bad for the employees. I remember at least one instance in which I felt really embarrassed. I did an online program that was geared towards new drivers. It was all about driving safety and took forever to do. At the end of the course, the young driver had the opportunity to get lower insurance rates. So I had to call a customer service representative and confirm personal information as well as answer some things from the course in order to get the rates. My mom kept insisting I put the phone on speaker. Every time I did, the rep would tell me to take it off of speaker. My mom would then try to follow me around the house trying to listen in, and the rep could hear her and said she needed to stop. My mom got mad at the rep, and I ended up not getting the lower rates on my insurance because the rep was fed up. She sounds hideous. I was 14 and my mom did this shit back on my birthday because she didn't think the girl had the right attitude. I remember being like, please, don't do this. Even though I agreed the girl had a nasty attitude. Mom's partially deaf and the girl refused to speak louder or more clearly, even after being told that, plus rolling her eyes and twice getting the order wrong because I didn't want a scene. My mom was determined to speak with the manager though, and wouldn't take our food until she did. Instead of getting the manager, the girl decided she wanted to come around the counter and scream in my mom's face for being a deaf old bitch. She swung on my mom and I jumped on the girl with my brother to keep her off my mom. She bit me twice. Police got called. We were banned from back after the manager came out and took the employee's side. Cops did nothing because the girl was 16. Never been more embarrassed or angry. Ruined my whole birthday. I should have said I wanted McDonald's instead. Oh well. Yeah, that doesn't really sound like her fault. Definitely embarrassing for you, but she's not the reason they suck. My dad is a pretty big hothead and thinks yelling loudly at customer service employees will solve things. So one time I brought my laptop into a Best Buy for a quick fix. They said I could come get it the next day after it was finished. We show up the next day and they give me a laptop that is 100% not mine. I just let them know politely that there's been a mistake and it's not my computer. They apologize and go looking for mine. 10 minutes later they can't find it. Cue rage machine. Father, you better find his laptop or there are going to be problems. No mention of what kind of problems, just one of those I'm screaming it sounds threatening sentences. They explain they will keep looking and call me when they have found it, but that they will call me every day with an update. I'm totally fine with this, being a relatively laid back person. I was only worried I wouldn't have a laptop for my first week of college. Anyways, they called every day and every day my father would get on the phone and yell about how unbelievably stupid you'd have to be to lose a computer in the store. This happened for about 4 days. Every time they would get off the phone with my father, I would call them back myself to apologize for that and calmly say, "Don't worry about it, I'm sure it'll turn up soon." Guy on the phone was very gracious. I wasn't screaming at him, and told me if they didn't find it by end of day tomorrow I could come in and pick a laptop and they would write it off to replace mine. Well, they never found my computer, but I did get a much nicer one for free, which I honestly think, had I not called to apologize on my father's behalf every day, I wouldn't have been given the option to choose any laptop to replace it. Probably the time my mum threw a plate of spaghetti at a waitress because you didn't know if it had dairy in it or not. Apparently that was good reason for a play at spaghetti at someone. My dad started throwing a huge fit at movie theater snack prices, which, to be fair, were utterly ridiculous. It was $6 for a bottle of water. So yeah, you can rage at that, but don't shout down the 15-year-old cashier who I can almost guarantee has zero control over the pricing. If she did, she would probably lower it, so she would get shouted at less. In 8th grade, my mom stormed into the headmaster's office at my school when she found blood on my uniform and some scratches on my hand. I was terrified and scared as I was one who beat up a kid, and now my mom dragged me straight to the headmaster asking who beat me up. It got even more embarrassing when my mom demanded the boy to be punished who now had a semi-black eye. Spent 2 hours in the lobby of the MGM Grand in Vegas circa January 99. We had arrived with family friends to attend a hairstylist convention. Friend's mom owned a salon and mine managed it, and we discovered our family suites had a window view of their dumpster area about a minute after walking into the room. Cue my mother storming back down to the lobby and demanded the head manager at the front desk switch our rooms immediately. Watching her make a scene and get even angrier once security was threatened on her was mortifying. I was 10, tired and embarrassed, and just wanted us all to have fun. Luckily the head manager offered a vacant presidential suite for all of the trouble after getting my mother to calm down. Looking back, I realize he did it just to shut her up and restore calm back to the lobby for other guests. To this day, I'm overly nice to retail and food service workers to compensate for her behavior, even though she's not even around anymore. I never want to be that person. This is my favorite example of my mom being an absolute wacko. We are from New York, and I met her in LA, where she was vacationing for a few days. There is a restaurant we had been to before and really wanted to visit again. I guess you could say it's a hot spot. This is lunchtime, no reservation. We arrive at the restaurant and there are a bunch of open tables. It's early, probably before noon. My mom asks for a table and they say, "We are so sorry, but if you don't have a reservation, we unfortunately do not have any tables for you. If you'd like, you can leave your phone number and we can call you if we have any cancellations." My mom starts huffing and puffing, pointing at all the tables, which are of course reserved for 12 o'clock and 12:30 reservations, but are currently empty. She's making a whole scene and just storms out of the restaurant. I try to explain to her the way restaurants work, that there are empty tables because other people are going to be coming in later with reservations. She is storming down the block just ranting, "No, you don't get it. I've worked in restaurants my whole life. This is what they do. It's LA. It's like a nightclub. They don't like the way we look. This is ridiculous." While she's ranting, the hostess comes running down the block. They had a cancellation and they could seat us immediately. I was humiliated. I didn't even want to eat there anymore. Long story short, I never take my mom to any restaurant I like. He didn't ask to talk to the manager because I didn't let him get that far. I was around 19/20 when my dad and his girlfriend came to visit my brother and I. We went to Best Buy and they had a new season of his favorite show out on DVD. He grabbed it and took it to the counter where the cashier tried to ring it up. It wouldn't work, and suddenly the cashier got this nervous look on his face and says, "This isn't supposed to be on the shelf yet. I can't sell it to you." Well, you would have thought someone told my father they were taking all he had. He lashed out at this poor cashier, yelling at him how it wasn't my dad's fault they messed up and put it out early and they have to sell it to him, blah blah blah. I get super embarrassed. His girlfriend does nothing, so I'm stuck trying to yell my dad to calm down and then physically push him out of the store while he is still yelling. All I could do is look at the cashier and say, "I'm so sorry. I then lashed out at my dad in the vehicle. We didn't have a good relationship to begin with anyways. His girlfriend tries to defend him saying he is just stressed and he is upset he has to go home and won't be able to see my brother and I for a long time, blah blah blah. In the end I told him to take me home and didn't talk to him again for a while. Not my parents, but I was once out to dinner with my brother-in-law and his family. Our meals all came out at almost random times instead of all together. My brother-in-law demanded to talk to the manager because it was unacceptable that food come out at different times, and he said something about how he hopes they don't expect us to pay for the meal. He gave a big speech about how we came out so we could eat together, and he knows this is unacceptable because he used to be a waiter, etc. I was mortified because I didn't think it was that big of a deal. My mom constantly does this, but one time really sticks out. We went to a local Mexican restaurant, and as we were paying for the food she tried to use a coupon. The cashier said they wouldn't accept the coupon and my mom was furious. She demanded that the manager come out and accept the coupon. She caused a massive scene in the restaurant, and it lasted at least 5 minutes. As the cashier was getting the manager, I decided to look at the coupon. It was for a totally different Mexican restaurant in the area and my mom wasn't wearing her glasses. The cashier and manager both came back. My mom apologized, and they ended up accepting the coupon. My mother ranting to all and sundry she was going to get the brand new Walmart Supercenter in our town shut down because a cashier closed her register as we were walking up. Apparently she could do this because she knew people on the internet. It was 1998. 14-year-old me was mortified. In this case, I feel it was justified, but one time as a 14-year-old, a store tried to say that I was stealing a lip liner as my mom and I were walking out of the store. It was my chapstick that they didn't even sell at that store. My mom went off on them. It felt good to know someone had my back. To be honest, as I've gotten older, I've realized my mom just expects a standard, and if it's not being met, she communicates it reasonably, if a little tersely. I on the other hand am just less confrontational by nature, and will likely just brush a lot of stuff off as a customer. When I was about 5 or 6, my dad picked us up McDonald's on the way home, and got me a 5-6 piece McNugget. When we got home, he looked in the bag, and didn't see the nuggets. So he called up McDonald's, asked for the manager, and screamed at them that they needed to drive to our house with fresh nugs. The manager actually did, and apologized profusely at the door, and my dad took the hand-delivered nuggets from him and slammed the door in this poor manager's face. When he walked into the living room to give me my lunch, he found me eating the McNuggets that I had taken out of the bag in the car before we got home. I like to forget them, but that one time my mom sent me to Pizza Hut to collect $3 back that they had overpaid her. Well, when I was 10, my mom got a phone for Christmas, and it had a warranty on it. A little later my mother threw it on the ground and called the company asking for a full refund plus a new phone because they gave me a broken one. After a few weeks, a company staff came to our house and asked my mom what happened. She said that the phone you sold us was broken, and that I was heartbroken. He gave us a refund, but not another phone. My mum started yelling and told him that she would call the police for harassing me. She never did. Recently I asked her about it, and she said I have no memory of any of that happening. I think when I was about 6 or 7, I really loved animals, but we don't live near a zoo, so I was always asking how, or when we could go to one. I live in Canada, only a couple hours drive away from Montreal, which just so happens to have a really famous zoo. If you could call the biodome a zoo, that's for you to decide. My mom thought it would be a good idea for my 7th birthday to go to the biodome with me and my 2 sisters. As you would imagine, I'm hyped. By the way, my mom isn't really one of those parents who asks to speak to the manager, but she does it from time to time. We went to the biodome during March break because my birthday happens to be March 14th, which is March break here in Ontario, IDK about other places in Canada. Anyways, back to the story. So we got there on my birthday after getting a nice breakfast for me at some place. I think it might have been Cora's. I'm 16 now, so it's hard to remember. An important detail of this story is that my mom is really not too tech savvy, and she's also pretty cheap. This is important for the story because when she went to look at the prices of the tickets online, for some reason the website showed the prices in US dollars. Not a big difference, right? Between Canadian and American money, that is. Well, like I said before, she's a pretty cheap person, which isn't her fault. She doesn't make too much money, and she needs to support 3 kids as a single parent. So, we are about to get our tickets, when all of a sudden, the lady giving us our tickets says the price. It was around $100, with tax. My sister was 18 at the time, so she was an adult, and then me and my little sister were charged as children. This normally wouldn't be an issue. My mom would just grumble and pay, but she had already spent a lot of money on the hotel and the food for the previous 2 nights we had been in Montreal. She also had bought me a couple of gifts, so she was pretty strapped for cash. So, here's the part everyone's been waiting for. She kinda threw a little fit. Imagine that. A grown adult making a scene. She was probably exhausted. My little sister the night before kept waking up in the middle of the night, and with her, my mom was up as well. She eventually asked to speak to the manager after 10 minutes of trying to bargain with the lady handling us. The manager was on the phone before and had to hang up, so he was pretty mad. My mom started off with her, but on the website, it said it was only $80, and it looked like the manager and the lady were fed up. The manager then asked us to leave. It was probably the worst birthday, but also the most memorable birthday I've ever had. Sorry if this was kinda long. And hashtag X200B. When I was in high school I worked at McDonald's. One year I skipped sports day and decided to work instead because money. I was working in the kitchen when one of the cafe staff came out saying some crazy lady wanted to speak to the manager. I had to witness none other than my own mother call my manager a BBY-faced twat and go off about the cafe staff. I had to hide in the dry stock until she left. My dad is kind of a drunk. A rich drunk. We were out at an extremely nice restaurant in our small town. A very foodie and chic place that had only been open for a couple of years and had since become my favorite restaurant. I was sitting at a table with my siblings and cousins, all of us college age, while my dad was sitting with my aunt and uncle and mom at a table nearby. By the time we get our food, the parents are still sitting there chugging their wine with no food. My dad starts getting upset. I hear him call the waitress over. She brings them some bread and leaves them alone. We finish our meals and our parents are still sitting there without food and several empty bottles of wine. My mom is essentially fall asleep at this point. My father, furious, starts banging his fists on the table, shaking all of the silverware. The waitress goes into the kitchen to find the chef, but she is apparently taking too long. My dad storms into the kitchen. I hear him screaming at the top of his lungs like a fucking toddler. The chef calmly, politely walks him back to his table. He sits him down and, in the calmest voice possible, says, "Fuck you, sir. Now, get the fuck out of my restaurant. We have not been back since." When I was 10 or 11 years old, my whole family, 2 brothers, mom and dad, had all been going to the same nice old lady for haircuts for a few years. She usually did cuts for all 3 boys consecutively. We got to know her pretty well as she was super chatty. My mom wasn't as very organized and always called in a few days in advance to schedule appointments, so she called in and a new receptionist answered the phone and took her appointment down, or so the receptionist said. We arrived and my mom learned that the receptionist had not written down the appointment. We would have to wait a few minutes while our favorite stylist finished with her current client. My mom somewhat calmly said, "Well, if it's not written down, I guess we aren't coming back," then promptly left with us. The stylist even sent us a card a few days later. My mom had none of it. I think my mom was having a bad day. My dad is a union tire worker. He is gruff, logical, and curt. He doesn't appreciate people. He hates banks, conservatives, and corporations. One day, we went to Wells Fargo. He was depositing $3,000 in cash. He deposited the cash at the teller, and we turned around to leave. At just that moment he remembered that he wanted to go to the junkyard. to pick up tires or something. He turned back around and went to the same cashier. He said, "Oops, I forgot I needed some cash to get some stuff. Can I get back $200 of that cash?" The cashier said, "Sure. Just a second." She then went to the drive-thru area and talked to another cashier for a second. My dad was annoyed that she left, but waited like a champ. A few minutes later, she returned to tell my dad that, because he didn't have $200 in his account prior to the deposit, that he would have to wait 24 hours before his deposit cleared. He instantaneously burst into a fit of rage, screaming expletives about how much BS it was that cash had to clear. They somehow got him corralled into the manager's office where a long screaming match ensued, and the cops were called. Before the cops could get there, my dad put his arm on the manager's desk and swept the desk clean, including his computer and everything else on the desk. We then left immediately. I assume that they closed his account and sued him, but I have no idea how it ended. I was around 10 at the time, but I've never gone back to a bank with my father. Brother 13, sister 9, cousin 1, 10, cousin 211, and I 11 went to go eat at the nearby DQ by our house. Brother orders first and gets ice cream. The rest of us get burgers. Brother regrets his order and asks to trade, but none of us wanted ice cream. So he decides to ask the cashier to switch his order. I tell him he can't do, since he already ate some of it, but he ignores me and asks anyways. They say no, because since he ate some. Brother gets mad and walks home, and the rest us eat our food. And then, oh boy, my mom arrives, pissed off, and asks to speak with the manager. Manager comes up and says they can't switch his order because he already ate some of it. Mom waves the ice cream in manager's face demanding to switch his order. Again, she says no. I'm super embarrassed and focus on eating my food. Now I didn't see exactly what happened, but cousin 1 did, and his jaw drops and says something along the lines of, "Your mom just shoved the ice cream at the lady's face." We all look back, and poor manager lady had ice cream all over her face and hair. Mom grabs brother by the arm and nearly sprinted out of the store. I almost sank to the floor in embarrassment. As the manager was wiping the ice cream off, she points to us and angrily asks us to come over. We booked it, abandoning our food and ran home. Dad noticing us asking us what happened, and we tell him. He gets mad, turns to mom and says, that was not necessary, but mom wasn't having any of it, and blamed it all on them. Brother was red in the face. I don't think he expected that to happen. About 10 minutes later, with parents arguing about it, the police show up with little sister. We all forgot about her. She was mad at us for leaving her behind. The cops basically told us we were banned from entering that DQ. All of us glare at brother, who looked mortified. I don't know if my mom got in trouble. If she did, it was well deserved, but it was so embarrassing and unnecessary. To this day I haven't been back to that DQ, and that was almost 20 years ago. I always cringe a bit whenever I think about it. Edit, forgot a part. Sorry if my input doesn't enhance the discussion, but I just have to say that this thread is the most enthralling one I have read in a while. Oh god, here we go. And hashtag X200B. My dad is the stereotypical cheap parent. Wants every bang for his buck. Tips the minimum amount, unless the waiter/waitress is on their A game. Gets angry at staff that have nothing to do with anything. You know the drill. We are in Orlando for a vacation at Universal, and we are staying in a really nice hotel, because we were celebrating my graduating college, right? So we get there, check in, get to our room, and everything is fine. Except, the internet is down. It was complimentary internet, and my fiance and I were like, meh, it's fine. But my dad freaked out, and we went down to ask what was up in the lobby, and hashtag X200B. My dad walks up to the counter and asks, hey, why is the internet down? The clerk responds with something like, oh, there was a deadline or something. We have people on the way to fix it. My dad doesn't accept this answer and says, well, how long is it gonna take to fix? Rather loudly. At this point I'm aggravated that he's making a scene. The clerk mumbles out a response, like we don't know, probably about an hour. Then my dad says, are you aware that your customers are upset, and that we paid good money to stay in your hotel? What if I had a business meeting? What if I needed the internet for something, and now I can't use it at all, and this poor clerk has nothing to say, because they are already trying to take care of it? I literally dragged my father away from the clerk. Practically everyone in the lobby was staring at us, and #X200B, the internet was fixed within the hour. My dad used to rage at restaurants. It was horrible. And #X200B, something would happen. Not an insignificant thing like a forgotten drink, but maybe took too long to take our order, or just things relating to being impatient. And #X200B, we would tell something was gonna happen. His mood would darken, and then he'd get up and stalk the waiter and give her/him shit and call a manager. He would sometimes make a scene, or not, but often we had angry dad and a restaurant owner trying to correct the issue. And #X200B, so, most memorable thing, and #X200B, Swiss Chalet. And #X200B, after being there for about an hour we had our drinks and placed our order, and it was a packed house in the 90s, when Swiss Chalet wasn't a shitty fast joint juxtaposed into a Harvey's. Drinks were done, appetizers were done, and we were restless and starving. We noticed that noon around us had received their entrees. At the time Swiss Chalet was basically a chicken joint. You went there for chicken, and chicken. And #X200B, my dad gets up and steps in front of a waiter passing by and louder proclaims that we had been waiting over an hour for food. Get the manager, this is disrespectful. And #X200B, he did it in a loud and commanding way that we had the attention of the restaurant. I noticed I was an early teen, so memory is a bit foggy, that many people were in the same boat as us, so when dad got up and said what he said people noticed. I melted into my chair embarrassed. The manager came over, and after apologizing and calming my dad, the manager in a normal tone of voice Corsalu mentioned that the kitchen had run out of chicken, and that everyone is in the same boat, so sit down. And #X200B, yup, you guessed it, dad exploded. What do you mean the chicken restaurant has no chicken? He turned, looked at us and said, we are leaving. And #X200B, my little brother burst into tears and asked why we had to go, and my dad said in a kind but loud voice, because Swiss Chalet has no chicken and no plans to get any. We have to go to another restaurant if we want to eat. And #X200B, that restaurant's atmosphere got real sour real quick as people now understood why food was taking so long. It wasn't coming at all. And #X200B, and #X200B, for context, dad was doing the best he could after a nasty divorce, so he really looked forward to his weekends where we would go out. Times were tough for him, and I totally get where he's coming from, but when I was a teen, holy cow was unpredictable sometimes. Mom bought a pair of boots at a large fancy department store, wore them every day for approximately 6 months. Wore them in the rain a few times and the soles were eventually starting to come loose due to wear. While wearing the boots, she marches into the store, takes them off at the counter, plonks them down on the counter and demands a refund or a new pair because the quality of the shoes were not up to par, arguing that if it were, the soles wouldn't have started coming loose. Note, she no longer has the receipt at this point, but argues the boots have the store logo on the bottom, so she doesn't need one. She proceeds to argue for almost 20 minutes, refuses to budge, demands to see the manager. A queue has formed at this point and everyone is staring. The manager caves. He walks to the back, gets a new pair of boots, and brings them to my mom. She puts them on right there at the counter, and marches back out of the store as if nothing happened. My dad bought a stereo receiver from Best Buy, got it home, took it out of the box, and it wasn't the model that was supposed to be in there. It was also clearly used. Back to Best Buy we go. For us at the time, the nearest Best Buy was an hour away, mind you. My dad assumed that this would be an easy return/exchange, but first the employee and then the manager refused to accept it. He told my dad he'd have to contact the manufacturer. While he was arguing, my sister and I were shopping and had found CDs or whatever that we wanted to buy. While we were at the register, everything came to a head. My dad angrily told the manager that we would never do business with Best Buy again. I'd already paid, and my dad insisted that the employee refund our money. The manager had to come over and do some kind of override to process the return at the register. The manufacturer eventually did send my dad a new receiver. He didn't set foot in another Best Buy for years. This story is a little contrary to the spirit of the question, because my dad didn't make a habit of speaking to managers. And now as an adult, I can completely understand his reaction. But to teenage me, it was incredibly embarrassing. My dad is the king of I want to talk to your manager. He does the whole thing, where he screams at cashiers for not accepting expired last year coupons, and will complain if his fast food that he got for free with a coupon doesn't come with enough potato wedges. That kind of thing. The most embarrassing experience for me was one time when we went to Safeway and he wanted to buy donuts for my brothers and me. Now, the Safeway bakery doesn't exactly have top tier baked goods, but they are cheap, I guess. The donuts are 49 cents a piece. So he buys us all donuts, and then we eat them like 40 minutes later when we're done with shopping and get home. I had selected a jelly donut, and when I ate it there was barely any jelly filling. I made the mistake of saying this out loud in front of my dad, but I wasn't upset about it. I just kind of shrugged like oh well, and finished the donut. My dad, however, was livid on my behalf. The next day he drives us way out of the way, probably spending multiple dollars in gas to go back to the Safeway because no jelly filling in a donut is just unacceptable, and we are going to get you a new one. Again, this was a 49-cent donut. I begged him not to, and said that I really didn't want another donut and there was no need to go back to Safeway, but he was on a mission. We get to the Safeway and he immediately gets a new jelly donut and marches up to a cashier like I bought a donut for my daughter yesterday and it had no jelly filling. It was clearly defective, so I need to get a new one for free. Cashier was like, okay, are you returning the old donut? Dad, no, she already ate it. That's how we know there was no filling. And that's just unacceptable. We need a replacement. I was standing as far away as possible, wishing I would melt into the ground, but he keeps gesturing at me, so I'm clearly part of this. The cashier was like, okay, I guess. Do you have the receipt? Of course my dad had the receipt. He keeps all of his receipts. He hands it over to her and then says, actually, you should refund me for the original donut and also give me this one for free since I had to drive all the way back here to get a new one. Cashier is like, I can't refund you and also give you a new one. It's either slash or, after arguing with the cashier for a minute or two, dad asks to speak to the manager and throws a fit about the defective jelly donut. Manager apologizes profusely and refunds my dad his 49 cents and gives us the new donut for free. My dad hands me my new donut triumphantly and I'm like ready to cry from embarrassment and really annoyed at my dad. As we walk out the door, I throw the new donut in the trash because A, I didn't want a new one in the first place, and B, I was so fed up and embarrassed at this point that I wouldn't have been able to eat it even if I had wanted to. My dad is angry that I wasted it and lectures me about being immature. I haven't spoken to my mom in years, but she is 100% one of these people. One of the most cringy things I can think of, right around 9/11 I guess, there was the whole anthrax in the mail thing going on. My mom ordered stamps through the mail. The stamps were delivered, along with a little note that said something about them having a powder coating on them to absorb moisture and ensure they don't lose their adhesive. My mom, who probably didn't even notice the powder, calls the USPS and complains about how someone mailed her anthrax with her stamps. And when that went nowhere, she contacted all the local news outlets and had a press conference in our front yard where she went on about why the USPS would try and poison her. I was sitting in the library in middle school with my mom and my advisor getting my assessment done to transition to high school. A bunch of other kids were at other tables with their parents and advisors. We were having a decent conversation, but as soon as my advisor went over my test results for math, my mother blew up. I scored in the 99th percentile, ahead of kids in the honors classes. My mom was screaming and ranting in front of everyone else there. All the students were looking at us. She wanted to know why they had held me back, why they never put me in one of the high school math classes. And when the advisor recommended not sending me to summer school to complete algebra, it just made her furious. I remember seeing my crush's face, and when he locked eyes with me, I died a little in that chair. Thing was, I wasn't some math genius. She just forced me to learn algebra in my free time that year, so they couldn't have figured it out, because it didn't happen until a few months prior. And she knew it. My dad is very picky about his steak and nobody can cook it right according to him, yet he orders steak everywhere we went, and then proceeded to complain about it. Last time he did this, I had begged him not to order steak. He did anyway, and wouldn't eat it, because it wasn't right, but did eat another dish the server offered him. They also took both meals off his tab. He waited until we took our ticket to the counter to pay, and looked like he was about to go off about his meal, when I said, "If you bitch about that steak I will walk out right now, because you embarrass me." He must have thought I was joking, because he proceeded to bitch to the cashier and I walk out and leave. A few minutes later he comes to the car, and is all, "You walked out? I didn't think you would." To which I replied, "I'm sick of you doing this. I'm no longer going out to eat with you." To this day I haven't gone out to eat with him. This incident was years ago. R/Ray said narcissists don't have one. I always walk to some other part of the store/restaurant the moment those words leave her mouth. Oh, every time I go to a restaurant with my parents and my sister they nitpick the service, the food and the wait staff. It annoys me greatly that they cannot have one meal without making a scene, and no doubt getting our food spit in from time to time. A few years ago at the Outback they had our server nearly in tears. When we were walking out I told them I had to go to the restroom and tip the poor lady $100. As the manager in a lot of these stories, I just want to say that the amount of time I have to encourage people to tell me when things are wrong greatly outnumbers the times people demand to see me without warrant. Yes, of course, I have had people make a beeline to me and start a conversation with "Are you the manager?" Well, unleash torrent of BS anger. But I also bartend periodically and usually have to encourage my patrons to send something back if they don't like it. It's alarming how often someone will get an undercooked burger or a drink they don't like, and would rather sit quietly in fear of being that person than to commit to letting me fix the problem. So those of you reading and saying "I'll never complain," please understand, my job is to make you happy with your service and to ensure you want to come back. If something is wrong, we are not mind readers, tell us. I'd rather you mention it to me, a server or a bartender, than to feel bad and never come back. Correcting a mistake is not the same as bitching me out because your mid-rare burger has some pink or your empty vodka tonic was too weak. My dad has the exact opposite problem. He insists on complimenting management, or better yet, owners, when their product or service is better than he expected. In principle this is fine, but he takes it to extremes. We once had to wait almost half an hour for a manager to be available because my dad insisted on speaking directly to the manager to let him know a certain staff member was especially helpful. Another time he called the pizza place back 4 times in 3 days asking for the owner because the pizza we got delivered was really good. When I went up a grade in high school and got a different history teacher, my grades improved. Dad called the Department of Education and tried to formally request the teacher get a raise. He wanted to schedule an appointment with the principal for the same reason. I love him, but goddamn he's a weird dude. Growing up Mormon, my mom would proclaim, "We don't drink coffee," in a condescending manner when offered at a restaurant. My thought was always, why can't you just say, "No thank you"? I wish I could tell you a particular story, but they've merged into a blur of suppressed memories. Obligatory, this'll probably be buried, but I'll share. This was with my mother. Had purchased these Puma shoes, you know the ones. The kind that had like different types of cow logos on the sides, awesome BS, from Foot Locker, and liked them. They were like $70 to $80, can't remember. They were the most expensive thing she had bought me in a long time. Anyway, a few days of use, the front of them got kinda scuffed up. They were really white with some red, so that would be expected. My mother was having none of that. So, she took the shoes and marched straight back to the Foot Locker store and demanded we not only get a refund, but also a replacement pair. For 10 minutes she argued that they are Puma shoes, so they should be held to a much higher standard and shouldn't scuff so easily no matter what. All I could do was hold my head down as she argued with these poor minimum wage cashiers about this topic. To make matters worse, the customers in line behind us started arguing with her too, and telling her that Puma or not, shoes scuff and suffer damage. It happens. She was having none of that either. After about 20 minutes of back and screaming forth from her end, she insulted them a bunch and they threatened to call security, and the line she kept shouting back at them was, "Why am I stealing from you?" During and after the fact, she seemed to truly believe that that is the only reason why security would be called. Security was called, came over and escorted us out of the place. The whole way home, she kept hooting and screaming about it and shouting I should have split the shoes open with a knife. Then they would have had to refund and replace. My mom asked to speak to the manager after her food took too long during lunch. He spoke to her and personally apologized plus a free meal etc. Then she went home and wrote an email to the address listed on their website, complaining again about the situation. Then a year later I started working there, and one day, my mom had come in for lunch. Her order ticket had her full name on it on the kitchen line. Coincidentally, a friend from high school was working in the kitchen at the same time as myself, and recognized that we had the same last name. I confirmed that it was my mom's order when the manager had a look, so he could make fun of me for making my mommy's food regular kitchen banter. Then it hit him. My mom was the polenta lady. Her email, as I had found out, went straight to the owners, and they pinned it up on the line for a month. Then they gave the manager a near beating for the incident. My mom continued to come in regularly over the next year. Each time she ate lunch there, everyone on the line would start proclaim loudly, "Rooted Oaks mom's here. Make sure her order is perfect or else she'll write another email." My most embarrassing moment was actually my fault, but it was also pretty hilarious. So there's an all-you-can-eat sushi place near my house that used to be a Chinese buffet. Now they also have an a la carte menu and still serve more traditional food like chicken dishes, etc. There's a coupon up on Groupon for like 0.50% off or something. Literally zero fine print saying that it wasn't good on the AYCE portion of the menu. So we get the Groupon. We go in 4 of us, me, my brother, my dad, my brother's friend. End of the meal comes, and they refuse to take the Groupon. My dad obviously asks for the manager and starts talking about how there's no fine print, etc. I'm just like, okay, please let this end. And I start mindlessly playing with a pair of chopsticks on the table. Somehow, one gets out of hand and launches across the table, straight into the manager's dick region. My brother's friend and I start dying. The manager continues on and eventually honors the Groupon. But it's a story to this day of the chopstick dick. Not my parent, but a date I had recently. I got divorced about 2 years ago. Geez, that long already. My ex-wife was an alcoholic and a cheat, and while my life is certainly better without her now, it didn't feel like it for a long time. I was dedicated to her fully, and having that ripped away made me a single Pringle for a long time. My very first date in 10 years was about a month ago after finally working up the courage to ask this cute girl at my school out, and it was just fucking awful, haha. This girl was a menace. Took that "I'm bothered by your presence" tone with the waitress, talked to her like she was an idiot, corrected her on her pronunciation of a dish, criticized her haircut, and was just a bitch. Then would immediately turn to me and smile as if looking for confirmation, and was super nice to me the whole time. It was a jarring experience to say the least, but it culminated with Ms. Hyde. She has since been called anytime I tell this story, returning her drink to the bar because it wasn't strong enough, then wanted to speak to a manager. We hadn't even received our food yet. She started complaining about how the waitress had been rude and seemed to not care about us at all, so the manager called the waitress over. By this point I was just floored, and I couldn't take it anymore. As soon as the poor girl came over to us, I turned to her and said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut this off. Here, use this card for my order. She will be paying for her order because this date is super over. Please have the cooks make this order to go. Whatever her order was going to cost, please add it onto the bill as your tip. I'm terribly sorry for her behavior. You have been fantastic, and I appreciate your grit in being able to still put on a smile for someone so toxic." The manager's eyebrows hit the ceiling, and the waitress quickly hurried off to process the bill. Ms. Hyde was less than thrilled. told me to go fuck myself, and said she will be getting an Uber ride home and stormed off. I got an extra hug from the waitress when she brought me my meal, and on my way out I caught sight of my date getting told she wasn't allowed to leave until she paid her check or the police would get involved. Boy, can I pick M. Fuck those who are rude to service people of any kind. Like and subscribe for good luck, you handsome gentleman.